Well, first, Michael, we'd like to thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. The audience, I feel, got a lot of out of what you were presenting with machine learning and staying ahead of the curve. Because Google and EDA are building this kind of ecosystem and community of people that are kind of joining together to get best practices from leaders like yourself. Can you kind of give us your thoughts on what Google and EDA are doing with these data talks?
Well, I think it's great to build this community because people get inspired by hearing some of the cases and also some of the problems that these cases have presented. And I thought it was a pretty important message today. Is that it's one thing to build a machine learning model, but when you're part of the financial sector, you also have to get the approval of the FSA. So that was an important message from me that when you're in a regulatory area, you have to make the authorities understand what you're building and what you're planning to use the model for. But I think it's always great to have a community with the same interest and trying to get these concrete examples. And for me, when I attend one of these events, it's the examples that makes meaning to me. People talking too theoretical about some of the issues that don't really apply to me. I want to hear what have you built, how are you using it, concrete examples.
Mm-hmm. Super.
Yeah.
Well, there's so much responsibility that your organization has in keeping up with these trends for compliance and kind of the standards and how data is used in your industry. Can you kind of let your users know about your journey and your experience in working with a big company like e-nettet? How kind of let them know the journey in being leaders at the forefront of data and machine learning for.
Yeah, but I think we're a bit blessed by being the company that e-nettet is because we're owned by all of the banks, and the banks have all the customer interaction. So we have the time and the availability to try some of these new technologies. Ewan talked in his presentation about that you just couldn't pause a system because the customer wants it accessible at all times. But at e-nettet we have the ability to try new technologies, new business models, because we don't have the customer interactions. So we're blessed in that way, in accordance to the banks who are our owners. So.
That's super nice. Can you kind of relay for our listeners, maybe it might not be the case at e-nettet because you're so open to exploring new methodologies, but the traditional challenges that some of your bigger customers that are working with you that they face when they're looking to become data-driven as a culture, and then also using new technologies. What are some of those challenges?
Well, for most of the banks and the data centers, they have these legacy systems, systems that were built 25, 30 years ago, which are at the core of their banking business. And nobody really wants to touch them because the people who built them are either switched jobs or retired or something else. So nobody knows how to expand them or replace them. And as long as they work, the feeling, or at least my interpretation of the feeling is, don't rock the boat. Because it's working right now. We have the customers who are visiting us every day and want to have calculation for their loan. So as long as it's working, don't rock the boat. Mm-hmm. But at some point, they'll have to take these legacy systems and rebuild them. Because I think the only way for them is to rebuild them from scratch and simply rebuild a new engine. And that's a big, costly operation. And a lot of the banks and data centers are met with all of these compliance issues and new regulations, PSD2, GDPR, and they're consuming all of their resources. And that's not a nice to thing to do. That's a need to. And everything that's need to always gets in front of what's nice to. So right now, all of the development resources at the big banks are tied up in GDPR, PSD2, and all of these other directives that come from the European Banks Association. So I think that's one of the biggest problems in order to be data-driven, in order to use all of these new technologies, machine learning, etc. So. Mm-hmm.
That's super interesting. And I guess because e-nettet is kind of at the edge of being able to explore with new things, can you kind of let our listeners and followers and people new to Data Talks kind of give them some insights on trends maybe to follow that can help them kind of, keep pace with the fast curve of data-driven technologies? Or?
Well, for us, the biggest trend is trying to automate some of the manual processes that go on every day in the banks. I mentioned the example in my presentation with these land registry records, that every time you have to make a loan, you have to read through these land registry records, trying to look for warnings. Are there some special things, some things you have to be aware of concerning this building? And it's maybe 30, 40 pages long, and you have to read it every time. And Danske Bank has to read it, and then Nordea has to read it, and then Jyske Bank has to read it. Can you automate that process? You have the OCR scan, you have the natural language processing, and on top of that, could you build a neural network that could look for these warnings and present them as a warning instead of having to go through all of these 30 or 40 pages? So automizing manual process is a big part of what we're trying to achieve, and we're doing it through these new technologies that are becoming available. So, and again, we're blessed because we don't have any old systems that we have to work up against. We're treading new ground, and therefore we can take these new technologies and use them. So
that's super nice. Yeah. Well, yeah, that about wraps it up, and we definitely appreciate your time, Michael. Thank you so much for your presentation, and we look forward to following you for more insights.
You're welcome.